This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hello everyone, I'm Neetsahone, and today is Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. This week we're looking at cards from supplemental sets. A supplemental set is one that Wizards releases that skips legality in Standard and usually also in Modern. Most supplemental sets are based around more casual variants of the game, or they have a unique limited format. This includes things like the yearly Commander decks and Plane Chase, as well as draft innovation sets like Battle Bond and Conspiracy. These sets are usually predominantly made up of reprints, but there are also a number of entirely new cards that are only legal in the Eternal formats, Legacy, and Vintage. The majority of the cards released in these sets are aimed at Commander players or people wanting to play a unique format, so most of the time they're not that powerful. But every now and then, something they print in one of these sets sees a ton of play in Legacy and Vintage. To be eligible for this list, a card had to have its first printing in one of these supplemental sets. Now, before we get started, a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A Pro Tour or Mythic Championship top 8 as well as a Legacy or Vintage Championship top 8 is worth 2 points and a Grand Prix top 8 is worth 1 point. Now, let's look at number 10. At number 10 I have Baleful Strix, which was first printed in Plane Chase, and it's also one of my favorite cards ever. The Strix is great because it is basically impossible for your opponent to do anything better than get 2 for 1 by it, because it has Death Touch and it draws you a card when it comes into play. And you only have to pay 2 mana for that much value. Doesn't hurt either that it's evasive and can potentially get in for a little bit of damage too. It has been played fairly regularly in Legacy since it was printed back in 2012 in a wide variety of decks, since it's the kind of card that can fit a variety of strategies. The most common home for it in the format has been decks like Bug, 4-color Control, and Grixis Delver. It has only seen top 8s in Legacy so far, though it is also played in some Vintage decks, and that might change in the future. At number 9, I have Recruiter of the Guard, which was printed in Conspiracy, Take the Crown, in 2016. Tutors can be quite powerful in Eternal formats because the average power level of cards is so much higher, so you can get some silly stuff with a card like Recruiter of the Guard, which is restrictive, only getting creatures with 2 or less toughness, but there are plenty of those to go around for a card like the Recruiter to be quite good. So far, it has only seen play in Legacy and almost exclusively in Death and Taxes decks. Death and Taxes is a traditional hate bear deck, meaning that the deck is loaded up with 2-mana creatures that hate on various strategies, and Recruiter of the Guard fits right in there because most of those creatures have 2 or less toughness. It can help find your singleton cards that can really shut down an opposing strategy. The win condition in those decks usually involves Stoneforge Mystic 2, and being able to find that at will is also pretty great. Death and Taxes is going to continue to be relevant in Legacy going forward, so you can bet that the Recruiter will have some opportunities to move up this list. At number 8 I have Toxic Deluge, which is an incredibly powerful board sweeper that was originally printed in Commander 2013. 3 mana and some life to nuke the whole board is a great deal, and you can also control how much this kills your own stuff to some degree, since you can save your creature with higher toughness while you kill everything else. It has been featured in Control decks in both Vintage and Legacy. In Legacy, this has most frequently been 4-color Control decks, where it has been alongside Baleful Strix a decent amount. In Vintage, it used to be played in decks like Jace Control and Land still, but it hasn't seen play there in a while. At number 7, we have Sanctum Prelate, which was originally printed in Conspiracy, Take the Crown. We talked about hate bears earlier when we looked at Recruiter of the Guard, and, well, Sanctum Prelate is one of those hate bears that the Recruiter can search up in Death and Taxes decks. The Prelate has a powerful prison effect that can really shut down a large number of non-creature spells in the opponent's deck. In addition to seeing play in Death and Taxes in Legacy, the Prelate has also seen play in Esper's Stoneblade, and it's going to continue to put up points in Legacy moving forward. At number 6 we have Dack Fayden, who made his debut in Conspiracy in 2014. For 3 mana, Dack can do a lot of work, by either ticking up and helping you loot through your library looking for what you need, until you get enough loyalty on him to activate that incredibly powerful ultimate that lets you start stealing your opponent's stuff. His -2 is also great in formats loaded up with powerful artifacts, and Legacy, and especially Vintage, have a lot of those. He only has a few points in Legacy, but has done a lot of work in Vintage decks, a format where you can steal Moxen and other mana rocks, as well as just about every single card in powerful Mud decks. Because artifact-heavy decks like Mud are so prevalent, Dack sees play in a wide variety of decks, including Delver, Oath of Druids, Landstill, Monastery Mentor, and Storm. Like pretty much all the cards on this list, Dack Fayden is going to continue to accumulate points going forward. At number 5, I have Leovold, Emissary of Trest, who was originally printed in Conspiracy Take the Crown in 2016. Leovold makes it so your opponents can't draw extra cards, and that's a big deal in formats where something like Brainstorm is so prevalent. And in addition to that, if you have Leovold in play, any removal spell your opponent casts now becomes a 2-for-1 in your favor because Leovold draws you that extra card. So, he really makes sure you're going to come out ahead in terms of card advantage when he's in play. Leovold is mostly seen play in Legacy, where he has fit right into decks like Bug, which these days is sometimes called Bug Leovold. These are aggro control decks loaded up with efficient creatures who almost always make sure you're coming out ahead one way or another with card advantage. That's why the deck also plays something like Baleful Strix, who we saw earlier. Leovold is a key card in Legacy these days, and that doesn't seem like it's going to be changing anytime soon. At number 4, I have True Name Nemesis, which was originally printed in Commander 2013. True Name Nemesis is the only card in the game that can have protection from a player, which means that they can do almost nothing that would interact with it. This includes blocking and targeting with spells. The Nemesis can die to board sweepers and sacrifice effects, but that's about it. 3 power and protection for only 3 mana means this thing has done a ton of damage in the Eternal formats. In Legacy, it is regularly featured in Bug decks like Leovold, but it also sees play in Delver, Threshold, and Stoneblade. It just provides an excellent and difficult to deal with win condition for those decks. It also doesn't hurt that it has the useful Merfolk creature type, as in Vintage it has really only seen play in Merfolk decks. At number 3, I have Containment Priest, which was originally printed in Commander 2014. The Priest is yet another hate bear. It's a 2-mana 2/2 with flash that hates specifically on effects that cheat creatures into play, whether your opponent is trying to reanimate them or use cards like Sneak Attack and Show and Tell. Adding flash to a card with this effect is awesome because you can cast it in response to one of those spells, which then causes a spell to do absolutely nothing, meaning you're probably going to be getting a 2-for-1. Reanimation decks and Sneak and Show decks make up a pretty large part of the metagame in the Eternal formats, and as a result, Containment Priest is a fixture in both Legacy and Vintage, having amassed 69 points in those formats in only the 5 years it's been around. Basically, if you play white in Legacy or Vintage, you probably have some number of Containment Priests in your main board or sideboard. Containment Priest is going to continue to move up this list going forward. And number 2 is Scavenging Ooze, which, believe it or not, was originally printed in a supplemental set, Commander 2011. This came as a surprise to me when I started making this list because I was away from Magic between about 2009 and 2013, so I assumed when I came back and Scavenging Ooze was part of Standard, that was the first time it had been printed, but it wasn't. This is a unique card in that sense because no other card in supplemental sets have been reprinted as a standard legal card. This also helps out the Ooze with its score because it had a time of standard legality, and it's also legal in modern, and neither of those is true for most of the other cards on this list. So what makes the Ooze so good? Well, it starts out as a reasonable 2-mana 2/2 and then it gets a lot bigger, and the way it gets bigger is exiling cards from graveyards, something that just happens to be useful against graveyard-based decks in multiple formats. And it also doesn't hurt that it gains you some life, allowing you to get some breathing room against more aggressive decks. While it saw play in Standard, Modern is really where the card has made a name for itself over the years, with its most successful homes being decks like Jund and Abzan. It has also seen some play in Legacy, primarily in Elf decks. And at number 1, we have Flusterstorm, which was originally printed in Commander 2011. This is a very strong counterspell since it only costs a single mana and will make multiple copies of itself when you cast it. It is particularly good at countering other cards with Storm, since it will in most cases produce enough copies to counter all of the opposing copies of a Storm spell. It is also good for Storm players to use, because they can have it to protect their combo if the opponent tries to interfere in some way, and the Storm count on it will be high enough to keep you on track to win the game. But it is a good counterspell in any deck, and as a result, it is pretty much a staple in the Eternal formats, especially Legacy. Now, it is also legal in Modern because of a reprint in Modern Horizons, so it will be interesting to see what it does there going forward. Well, that does it for this MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to see the over 200 of these I've already done, you should see the playlist on your screen now. Thanks for watching.